Hi, in today's episode, I speak with Kirk Souder. Kirk is an executive and leadership coach. He works with high impact leaders, really helping them align to work with more impact and more meaning. He has been a founder of a marketing agency, a branding agency that also helped organizations like Mattel and Google and Netflix really step up in a more visionary way around their brands and their work. In today's conversation with Kirk, he shares a very personal story about a big decision he had to make, and that decision was to amputate his leg. That decision, as you might imagine, has led to a lot of other really amazingly helpful, profound, and insightful realizations for him. It absolutely has informed the way he works with others, and throughout our conversation and our dialogue, we really explore themes around decision making, around letting go of identity, letting go at times when we're feeling really attached to something, and the value of stepping into the unknown. We talk about our essential deeper nature, and that the more we can have a relationship to that, a knowing of that, how much it can inform our decisions. That's just a very high level look at our conversation. We go in a lot of different directions, and I think you're going to find it as meaningful and interesting as I did. So without further ado, here's Kirk. Welcome, Kirk. Thank you so much for being here today and agreeing to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. You know, as you were just saying before we jumped on, I think whenever we get on a call or a Zoom, I'm always love where the conversation takes us. So I'm excited to share that journey with the listeners today.
Same as me, Barb. Whenever we have these incredible chats, I'm always like leave in a greater altitude than when I started. So I've been looking forward to this all day.
Well, I'll just say and share with the audience that when I invited Kirk to be on, he was on a few years ago, and it's a wonderful episode sharing about his leadership journey and his own work journey. But I'll link that in the show notes. But as you're going to hear, Kirk had a personal story, a personal life event. It sounds so trite to say it that way, but I want you to want it to come from your mouth. But at the time that you were having to make some really difficult decisions, you unsurprisingly shared that journey with others. And I was so touched and moved, and it opened me up. Like, your journey really did something for me, that when we were chatting last week, I asked if you'd be willing to share that and kind of share the continuation. And so unsurprisingly, again, you said absolutely. So I think it might be worth it to just begin there, but understanding that there might be some precursor or context you want to bring to it. But the story I'm referring to is really the choice and the decision point at which you made the decision to amputate your leg.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So just over 2 years ago, I developed a very resilient infection in a artificial joint that I had. I had a long journey with cancer in my youth. While given a terminal prognosis at the time, the good news is that clearly I survived. But, many things were done with my leg. I had 4 total knee replacements. And finally, just over a couple of years ago, an infection came into that joint. And when that happens in an artificial joint, it's problematic. Lots of things have to occur to try and get it out. It just developed into sepsis. It was kind of a big deal. And after a little over 2 months in and out of hospitals, I had a major surgery every week. So 7 or 8 surgeries in that time. I was looking at the future, and I could see that there really was no end game to this. Like, with what was going on, it could be another 2 years of going in and out of the hospital for all I, that journey with cancer many, many years before, where I was given a terminal prognosis, gave me, the biggest blessing in my life. And then I was able then to have a lens on life where it was kind of like, am I using this time to the utmost that it can be used for in terms of aligning with what brings me alive in the world to do and so on. And so when I looked at that future and realized that that could very well be 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years away from my work and what I really love to do in the world, that was the tragedy. That was the tragedy in front of me. And then, I just had this moment of clarity. I was in the pre-op waiting to go into surgery number 6. And the doctor's proceeding to tell me kind of, well, here's what's going to happen when I get in there. If this happens, we'll do this. If this happens, we'll do this. And some of these things were like, I'll spend a year in traction while we clean out your leg and all these things. And my wife was sitting to this side of me. And I just had this moment of clarity where I said to the doctor, just time out a second. And I said, my wife is the only one I really have to ask permission of what I'm going to put on the table. And my wife looked at me and she said, you want to put amputation on the table? I go, yeah, I'm going to put amputation on the table. And that's what I said to the doctor. I said, go in, and if you can do something quick to make things a little better, great. If not, just sew me back up again, and let's approach an amputation very consciously, doing a really great job with that. So that's what we ended up doing. And for me, for a lot of people, that can seem like a big giant like thing that no one would ever want to do. But when I looked at it in terms of, the same calculus that I talk to my clients about, which is what you're doing bringing you alive? Like, life is short. Like, is that happening for you, or is it not happening for you? And for me, it got very clear. I could possibly spend the next 2 months going in a hospital to save my leg, when in fact, I didn't need my leg for what I do in the world, what brings me alive in the world. So if I can get over that first mental block that occurs with so many about this, of like, there's tragedies and there's like death, and then maybe amputation is second to that for a lot of people, right? But for me, it was such a graceful way for me to get back to what really matters to me quickly. Like, because literally, and 4 days after the amputation, and it's a high left side above knee amputation of my leg. Within 4 days, I was back doing my work again. I was coaching on the phone from the hospital room and in great spirits. So I'm blessed with that. I think having cancer as a young man gave me a lens, and then the inner work that I've done in my life gave me the clarity to know that, like, this is actually a blessing. So many people with chronic disease don't get to just cut something away and be done with it. And I got to. And, when I woke up in the recovery room, the first thing I noticed, of course, was that suddenly my leg was gone. And the next thing I noticed, though, was that I was wholly intact. There was no difference in me, in what I define as me, at all. I was in a different shape, but otherwise I was wholly intact, if not even in a way wiser and stronger from it.
Wow. I mean, that's such a beautiful statement, and I can feel it. I can feel it when you say it. And I wonder, though, like, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think a lot of growth in life is simply the letting go of identities. I think, you know, we might identify as, I'm a hard worker who works 80 hours a week and I do this and that. And then faced with something, a conflict that is pushing that against its limits, we may be forced at that moment to say, maybe that's not my identity. Like, maybe I'm someone who's different than that, who has a different ecosystem of work and life and everything else, that where I can be even more productive, whatever it is. So that's an example of letting go an identity. I think as we progress through life, we begin to, if we are on the track of growth that I think the universe is pushing us towards, we begin to let go of identities more and more, to the point where maybe the last identity we let go of is the identity with the body, the identity with a youthful body, or whatever that happens to be. So for me, like, it's so important in my work, and I know yours too, Barb, that we want to guide people to begin to identify with that part of them where that is indiminishable by physical world circumstances, because it is. And because when our when people begin to identify with that instead of on the idea that circumstances are can diminish me or can affect me and so on, then they begin to have a kind of freedom in their lives to create on a level that they could never create before. So for me to have that moment of like, oh, let me go inside, nothing's changed. I am wholly intact. That part of me and that part of all of us that is in the end who we really are and is not only indiminishable and enduring, but also unlimited in its capacity to create on the planet, right? So for me, like having that fun little experiment to say, well, wait a second, like, am I still all here? And I was like, well, great, because that's what I work with people on all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's so profound and anchoring. And, when you talked about the diminish, I remember at the time you sharing that. So feel free to add more to this. But, the doctor's job was to try and save your leg at all cost. Right. And sort of built on the premise that without it, your life is somehow diminished. Now, in a very logical way, we could see that. Okay. But what you're speaking to is really profound because you got really clear. No, what was diminishing your life was not being able to be in your work or be in your life in the way you want. And, as if you were willing to do that with an amputated leg, you were fine. And so I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that's accurate. If I was a Olympic medalist in the sprint, like then I could see where that would have impacted, and I may have said,
Yeah.
okay, it's worth going on a little further to see what can happen here. But for me, it didn't make sense. It wasn't logical to do that because I don't need it for the things that bring me alive and matter to me in my life at all.
Yeah. And maybe just to broaden that, we're saying your work, but the truth is that the quality of life you were living inside of hospitals and multiple surgeries was not the quality of life you knew was possible. So, so that idea that, um, you could, that all of a sudden outweighed the save your leg at any cost.
Yeah, if I bought into the idea that reality is such that it is about saving your limbs at any cost, then I'd probably still be in the hospital 2 years later and still, full of antibiotics and everything else. But it's like a moment of clarity. And what was really interesting to me is that clarity, like, seeped into so many other things in my life after that. Like after I got out of the hospital and began to kind of survey and kind of come back online in a way of like everything that was going on with, in various fronts of my life, I became aware that there were three or four things that were these kind of energy drains and loops, that these things that I, was kind of invested in a way and wanted to keep going, and different kinds of like, we were there were these architects who we were working with at the time on this place we were building, and the various things that I could see that just were not working, and whereas I didn't have the clarity, I think, beforehand to see it through this lens of just like my leg was just something that was no longer working, that was just at this point taking energy from me in my life. I saw all these other things and began to, in a way, amputate them as well. And it's given me an enduring lens where I look at things through that lens of is this something that is, adding to the sum total of what I want to create, or is it not?
Yeah.
And it's given me a great lens too with people I work with to have them be able to look at that in a very honest way.
Yeah. And, that piece of, I'm curious if surrender played a part in any of this. And if it did, what did you have to surrender? You spoke about identity being potentially one thing.
Well, and it's close to that, which is attachment, right? There was part of me that was still attached to the idea of a normal body, right? Like a normal body. And there's parts of me that were attached to the things that would be easier still if I had two working legs, right? And there think like walking would be easier, hiking would be easier, all those things would be easier. But in the end, it's like what comes with that clarity does come up against those attachments still. And it's about like looking at that and saying, am I willing to surrender my attachments for the greater service of what I want? And I think what's become so important with that is how we can be more discerning and action oriented with regards to cutting away some attachments that we may have developed, is to have real clarity on what is it that we want to create, right? What's the experience that we want to have? Because without that criteria, how do we know what's an attachment versus what is really important to us, right? It's only with a criteria that we're able to do that. So to have really established in myself at the time, wait a second, like what is ultimately important to me right now? And does it serve me to keep hanging on to those attachments, or to surrender those attachments inside of me for the thing that I really want to create?
Yeah, I think I love that because, in very different ways. But, I can think about when I was first starting my business and I just had this idea of what it would look like because of my previous experience and my network, and certain things weren't moving in the direction that I thought. And it was puzzling, and, it was something I was, doing my best to figure out. And it really looked like a problem. And then one day I was driving and I just had this realization, like, wait a minute, do you really care who sits across from you? Like, you
Right.
just want to share and you want to make a difference and, help people transform. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, yeah, I really don't care. And in that, just coming to what really mattered, like, oh, that doesn't matter to me. And
Right.
not as much as wanting to share and make a difference. And it was amazing because, literally, I don't know the amount of time, but it wasn't long. It was like all these opportunities like look like magically falling in my lap that had nothing to do with what I thought I was supposed to be doing, who I thought I was supposed to be working with. Yet I think those were likely there all the time. But because I was so attached to the idea of what I thought I was supposed to be doing, or, I wasn't seeing it. And then to have that realization and open up new opportunities, all those opportunities
Yes.
made me better at what I did, better at
Yes.
what I do.
I love what you're sharing, because what I'm hearing in it is like these attachments are these various aspects of our life that we're hanging on to. Because often we think like, well, because that has merit, there's something there, right? But we find frequently when we finally get clear on what we want and begin to cut them away, is that there's a vacuum that gets created that gets filled with something even more in alignment with what we really want in our lives. Like when we have the courage to do that, inevitably that's what we find.
Like sometimes I think we're trying to make something happen, or drive something in a particular way, and it becomes difficult and challenging. And then I often, because of my background, go into the self-help, the personal development, the psychology, and all of that. But it doesn't really create any new traction or new movement until, as you're saying, it's like, oh, wait, what if the problem isn't my behavior or my discipline or, my marketing, right? Like, what if there's a deeper question to be asked? And, what is in alignment? Is what I'm trying to make happen in alignment? Is
Yes.
there something else that wants to come forward rather than what I think would be a really good idea and I've already spent money on and time and effort and energy?
Yeah, exactly. When you were describing the process before, and you said the first question you asked yourself was, wait a second, is this really for me? And then you said, the next part you said was, because this is what's important to me, and this is what's important to me, and this is what's important to me. And there I saw you work the very process we're talking about, which is to say, okay, here's the question, like, is this like, what am I doing here? And then, well, what's important to me? What's the criteria that I'm going to base my decision there on? And that's what you did. And that's exactly what we're talking about. I think real change and impact begins to happen in a life, in a business, whatever it is, when there is both clarity in terms of intention and what we want to create and aligned action with that. Like somehow those two things together create this clear signal that the universe, creation, whatever we want to call it, other people just needs to respond to. And I think when we hold on to things that are really no longer in service to that clarity, that it creates a conflicting intention, really. It's like, yeah, I really want this, but no, I don't really, because I keep choosing this thing over here. No, I really do. I'm serious, but I keep choosing this over here, and things tend to then stay in stasis. But when we really cease to do the actions that are not in alignment with what we're creating, that's when the good stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can feel like a mystery, but really the invitation is there's likely a lot of logical, rational reasons why, like not letting go, staying attached makes sense. But if we can slow down internally, if we can go beyond the noise of the thinking and the, sort of attachment, even in feeling to what's been going on, and find that quieter, still place within, often I find that answer or the very next move, at least, is right there. And that's alignment. So we could be aligned to yesterday's wisdom, the strategy that worked for someone else, the thing that worked for us in the past, or we can really only align with what is here today, in the moment, in the here
Yes.
and now. And
Yes.
otherwise, we're aligning with ideas, we're aligning with strategy. And again, not that we don't need ideas, we don't need strategy, but we're really talking about in those moments when things feel harder than, or struggle, or we're efforting, or we're pushing more. It's such, in my mind, those are just great opportunities to kind of invite, let me take a step back and listen more deeply.
Yeah. I mean, the struggle itself could very well be a signal that we are holding on to tools that were meant to get us to here, but they're no longer what is going to bring us forward, right? And we know that that happens so much. It's one of the ego's favorite little dances is, well, if something got me to here, then that's what I need to hold on to with all my life. And I'm going to, even if it feels like pounding the square peg into the round hole, I'm going to use this to keep moving forward, right? When that struggle, more often than not, is a sign that we're meant to let go. It's interesting. Right after I had the amputation and so on, and we went up to where I am right now, up north in Northern California, near the Redwoods, and sitting in a redwood grove and looking at the redwoods, and I observed that redwoods, the limbs don't really start till about 2/3, 3/4 up the tree, right? And I start to look at that, and I learn that there's a really good reason for that, which is a redwood is all about like going up to the sky. Like these are these amazing trees that just are so straight and they just go right towards the sky, the highest, largest trees on the planet. And what they do is, as they grow their limbs, as they keep going higher and the limbs that used to be up top become more underneath, they realize that, they're not as much in the light anymore. They're not as high as they could be. So they voluntarily lose those limbs to use that energy to grow higher limbs up closer to the light, closer to the air that they breathe, the moisture that they take in. And it was like, oh my gosh, there's exactly the metaphor that we're talking. It's not even a metaphor. It's like truth, right? Which is, if the redwood said, no, I have to hang on to that. I have to hang on to those lower limbs that got me to there because they got me to here. So they're probably going to, what's going to get me higher. They'd be stunted. Their growth would be stunted. They'd be limited to how high they got, but they're intelligent. Their reason for being is to go up. And so they're very clear. Now is when I lose the lower to gain the higher, right? So I looked at that in my own life. Like here I did lose a lower limb literally in order for me to keep going higher. That's what I did. And it's a great thing to be able to talk to people about who are struggling with letting go of anything that, like, whether it's a tool, a process, anything that got them to a certain level, suffering the illusion that it's what's going to keep them from going up, and say, no, like the universe is designed so that you let that go and higher ones become present.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think so many people want to have a new experience of themselves in their life or in relationship or in their business. They want to step into like new expression or new ideas and yet that the very nature of that means we have to be willing to let go of something, most
Yes.
identity, or let go of the needing to feel certain, letting go of
Yes.
feeling like we can predict the future, letting go of what, when you were sharing earlier, I also remembered that, prior to starting my own business, I was an executive, and definitely, work and workaholism have been a part of my adult life and really how I saw my value in the world. So when I let that job go to start my own business, I didn't realize that after about 6 months or so that that was going to be the identity that I was going to have to like meet full on, because I didn't know it at the time, but I obviously had some arbitrary idea of when it should be smooth, when I should know that this risk in quotes paid off. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to, make money. And, it was like all of a sudden you realize where your lines are. I think it was about 6 months in, seven maybe. And I was started to get really shaky and just feeling really unsettled. And as you're describing, similar, I just had this realization that, oh, I think my value and worth is totally connected to how I contribute in the world. I didn't know how I was going to let that go. I didn't know how I was going to see what you so beautifully spoke to earlier, like the inherent worth and value not being, that's non-negotiable. That's not at risk. But I think that that required a letting go of so many layers, and, even some recently, right? Like there's always seems like another layer to the onion. But that that thinking and the idea that who we are is what we do, or how well we do says something about our value, our worth, our okayness. So yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Like, because that's pretty deep ingrained in our culture that either what we are is what we do, or, it's a transactional universe. Like, we better be contributing so that something can be given to us back when, you look at natural systems and, nothing else is operating that way. It's like there's always a flow, a reciprocal flow, but it's not like this transactional, intentional thing of, like the honeybee isn't like doing a negotiation with the flower of how much nectar it's going to get versus how much pollen it's going to take to the next flower. It's just everything is just doing its best to respond to its aliveness, right? Like everything is just trying to be it to the fullest without an idea that there needs to be a transactional part to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and listen, that desire to want to have my own business, to want to explore the way I could contribute, all of that, that's coming back to that we want a new experience, a fresh experience of ourselves, but we have to go beyond, to your point, the going higher. I had to meet that part of me. And then as you're saying, the thing that really helped me was to go in the direction of, wait a minute, what who even says, where did it even begin that somehow value isn't anything but inherent, like you're saying, just a part of
Yeah.
our nature, you
Yes.
know so and listen, there are times I can still, just for to keep myself honest, there are times I can still get caught up in that thinking, but at
Well,
some point I'll definitely wake up.
well,
I'm
we
curious. Oh, go ahead.
I should say, I think we all still get caught up in old thinking. I just, to me, that's like, I hope the point of all this with, whoever's listening and beyond isn't that, oh, we're going to get someplace where we never have these old thinking and these old, constructs going on. The truth is, we always do. It's a point is that hopefully through this awareness, we just spend less time there, if we choose to. That's all. But I always want to make sure people don't have a this notion, this kind of the new age movement, whatever it is, brought this notion into the thing that like we're all like vanquishing the ego and we're vanquishing old thought. It's no, like we're in this incredible experience where thought is a part of it. And sometimes those thoughts are old and sometimes they're new. But the great thing is we get to have a vantage point of just deciding what we participate in or not.
Yeah. Well, and I think the gift in looking in the direction of the mind and thought and how compelling it can be, and then that there's this whole other world beyond our thinking and this innate resourcefulness that we have. For me, one of the biggest values, benefits in that, looking and getting more curious about that, has been, I feel like it's not that I learn to overcome the harder moments or that I don't have them anymore. It's like this idea of getting good at the full range of the human experience. And that has been so revolutionary because I'm, not trying to sort everything out, but I don't want to go in that direction. I won't like the way I feel. It's like, of course, feelings come and go, step in it. To the same thing, coming back to your tree analogy, we want to rise up, but sometimes the thing that will allow us to do that is to get better at handling the moments we feel destabilized and knowing we find our stability within. The moments it looks like it's all we made mistake or it's not working out, how do we go beyond the fear and the upset, let it be with it, but find our wisdom or our guidepost in those moments.
Exactly. The question to me is like, what's true freedom? Like we all want the experience of like freedom in life, right? So what's real freedom? Is it I have somehow managed to kind of absolutely eradicate my ego, my mind, thought, or is it I have found a way to just find my center and peace regardless of what things are happening in my life, what thoughts are coming up, what circumstances are around. And to me, that's the greater freedom because that's true freedom because then it doesn't matter what happens or what experiences come and go. I still like am connected to that which really from all things come, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. How has what you've seen since that choice, how has that influenced, informed your work? You spoke a little bit to it earlier, but how has it informed your work?
Yeah. I mean, what I spoke to earlier is a big one, which is, you know, again, even I'll reference my own life, which is just the having this greater new criteria discernment of like looking at things and saying, is this working? Like, is this really working for what I want to create? And just having a much like I'm grateful I'm just much more quick to pruning those things than in the past, right? And I think being able to work with that with people who are same people you work with, Barb, these high impact leaders who are moving, want to create big things, but, are still kind of attached to the lower limbs, in terms of what got them places. So with that, it's been so great. It's been so great to be able to reference my own growth track with that and be able to apply that lens with what they're doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. With all decisions, right? Even in the moment of clarity that we have, I'm trying to think how to articulate this, but like every decision has an implication. So, I know for myself, I can get so like analysis paralysis when I have a decision that, I think is important. And it can keep me from really just taking action. And I always kind of joke, it's like, I've sometimes taken years to do something because I've, trying to figure it all out ahead of time. And I'm just curious, like, if you could speak to no matter the choice we make, life still gives us opportunity to be on that ride.
Yeah, absolutely. You're saying that like as opposed to being in the paralysis of analysis versus moving. And I just this, I love looking at natural systems as things that can express to us the true nature of everything right away if we really look at it. And in nature, there are these two different values. They're called I think the static coefficient of friction, and there's the kinetic or dynamic coefficient of friction. And what they measure is the level of resistance towards something towards moving, right? And so what they measure is when something is still, it takes greater force to overcome the resistance when something is stationary. But if something's already moving, it takes less force to have that remove the static of the stasis, right? You go, how brilliant, like how true that is of us, that if we just, even if we don't, the ego wants to always know what's ahead, but if we're willing to move without absolutely knowing what's ahead, or with a certain amount of uncertainty, without being absolutely clear on exactly what it's going to look like, that that opens us up to so much more possibility because we're already in motion. There's less resistance to new possibility because we're already, you know, acting on our behalf in this world, in this universe. And so that truth, as it pertains to everything we do, I think is profound. When I'm saying, I'm sure the same as you, Barb, when we're working with people and just having them be okay with, like, just take an action. It's less about like how you see that dot connecting with exactly what you want to create. It's more about you just feeling this is an action to take right now, and just see what that births. I think it's a parable by Lao Tzu, where he talked about the monk in the dark forest at night. And it's a monk, he has a lantern over his head, and the lantern is casting just this one circumference of light. And after that, it's just darkness. And of course, the ego of the monk's saying, don't take another step because we don't know what's out there. And what if we step in the wrong direction for where we really want to go? But then that deeper, authentic self of the monk says, well, wait a second. If we take a step, doesn't the light move with us? Like holding the lantern over the head, and the ego has to concede, well, yeah, the light will move with us. And then the authentic self of the monk says, well, then with every step, we'll learn more and more about this forest that we're in. And we will, each time we'll make the best informed step we can. And that will illuminate the next moment in which we'll take another step. And the ego kind of knew it was gotten in that like when we go forward in action, each action creates new possibility, illuminates a new moment for us that if we hadn't would not be illuminated. And I think the other awesome thing in that parable that is spoken about is that the other thing to be aware of is that in reality, beyond that light, beyond the moment, there isn't a forest. It's this giant universe watching, waiting, wanting to be like contributory in its response to the direction that we step. So each step is a way creating another whole realm of possibility in that quantum field of potential. It's responding to each action we take. Each action is directional. So with both of those things, being aware of that, it's clear, like just move, just take action.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast last year sometime, and it was this woman, forgive me, I can't remember her name, but she had researched kind of successful entrepreneurs. And she said I think in her mind, it was like the number one thing that she attributes to their success is their willingness to make decisions. And it's because they understand no matter which decision you make, there's going to be challenges and you'll figure out how to overcome. And like, there's no decision that keeps you exempt from the unpredictable nature of life and business. And there's no decision that doesn't have challenges with it. So their willingness to make decisions quickly and move forward allows them to do exactly what you're saying, get traction, get more information. So when I step into it, then we get something happens and we get information, and so we
Yes.
can respond to that. And I love the analogy of that lantern. It's how that analogy has served me really well in my own business. Like, oh yeah, I don't need to know A to Z. I can just know A, step into it, and then I'll get to B and I'll see, and we'll move on from there.
Exactly. And that, we don't need to know A to Z because in reality, A to Z don't exist yet. That's something beyond the moment. right? So it really doesn't exist yet. But the actions we seed in the one thing we have, the moment, is what actually generates A to Z. So we're creating it. It's not something that it's out there that we're trying to find our way to. It doesn't exist yet. We are creating that through the actions we take in the moment.
Yeah, I feel like I need to rewind that, just what you just said, and that there's, a few really powerful things in there that, if we really saw that the creating of it happens as we give ourselves permission to engage and to take the next step, and that the formula or the vision or the idea that we know what A to Z is, it can't be anything other than imagination,
It
because
is.
we haven't created it yet. We haven't stepped into it yet.
It hasn't even been created, right? Everything beyond this moment is just this incredible field of potential in which we can create anything. I remember hearing an address by Steve Jobs where he spoke a little bit to this. He said, it's we can get scared of moving forward because we don't know how the next thing is going to connect to the next thing is going to the next thing, because we look behind us and we see how all the dots connect. So it kind of creates an illusion that there's all these already connecting dots in front of us, when in fact, like, we're the ones who create those connecting dots, and we're creating it as we go. And I love that as an example. It's like there's the illusion because we do look behind us and we say, oh, well, look how everything lined up perfectly. So I have to figure out how everything lines up perfectly ahead of me. When the reason why they align is because we simply took action and took the next indicated action, the next indicated action.
Yeah, and it kind of coming back to what we were speaking to earlier, I think if we realize like a couple things. One is we're okay no matter what. I don't mean that like life doesn't get hard or complicated or challenging at times, but beneath that, we're okay. Like we're okay no matter what. So if we see that, it allows us to take that first step maybe without knowing. And then the other piece that I think is just really valuable in those things is like we're designed to rise to the occasion, but we get information in real time, like wisdom, and we can't respond to what is. Otherwise, we're just we're either responding to where our imagination is taking us, or we're in life responding to what's showing up.
Yeah, we're responding to all too often to future catastrophes that haven't even happened or probably won't even ever happen, but we're responding in real time to that as opposed to what's present. And I would say it's like, I wouldn't say we're more than okay. We are these limitless creators who are creating these incredible realities, right? And the worst thing that could happen is if, because, you know, I'll call it like the chief risk officer inside of us points to a possible trajectory that has a possible horrible outcome, says, well, let's stop everything because that's a possibility. That would be no way to run a business, and it's no way to create our reality, as opposed to saying, not only am I okay, but I'm a limitless creator, and the universe is being created in response. My universe is being created in response to the what I hold in my consciousness and the actions I take. So let me proceed with that. I think the ego and society at large has us buy into this idea that the universe is this fixed place, and it's almost like there's a circle with a bunch of marbles in it, and that's all the marbles there are. So what's your strategy for grabbing as many marbles as you can, because we need marbles? As opposed to, no, it's like the universe is being created as we go. We're creating the marbles. Like each choice we make and each decision we make in the now is what is determines like what are the future marbles in front of us that are going to meant to help us with it, whatever we're creating. And that's the way the universe really is. And whenever anyone starts to create from that perspective, that's when amazing things happen for them. Like all the leaders, the really prolific leaders I know and creators I know, are people who operate from that consciousness. There's never a sense of, well, will my strategy get the marbles that are out there? It's more like, this seems like a really exciting thing to do that's going to align with what I think is like my aliveness in the world. Let me proceed with that and see what happens next.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it makes me think again, that everything is an opportunity to evolve us and to wake us up more to who we are at our essential nature, more of possibility. So, that, and as you started the conversation with, that decision around amputation woke you up to what's essential to you. It woke you up in an even more profound, real way about where you wanted to put that direction, right? Where you wanted to, what you wanted to back and what you didn't want to back.
Absolutely. It got me more connected to what my criteria is. For me, I go back to, because no one's ever said this better than Howard Thurman, but, ask not what the world needs, ask what brings you alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is more people brought alive. There it is. For me, if I probably had asked the question at that moment, like, well, what does the world need? The world needs someone with two legs but no, it's like, what brings me alive is this frontier of creation that is really exciting to me. And so, for me, it was a very simple thing then. Like, I want to be involved with that. And it had me double down on that criteria, so that now, as I look at through everything in my life, it's like, well, what's my criteria? Like, what am I here to do? What am I here to be? Am I being brought alive every day? Which of these choices lets me feel more aliveness, and being willing to choose that? Because even in what someone would call like one of the more trying circumstances, an amputation, I discovered that choice was still the most prolific and empowering choice I could have made. I can now look at how the dots connect from that moment 2 years ago. And, every day I'm just in gratitude that I actually chose what I did in that moment, because of, what I've been able to experience in the last 2 years that I wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I think on offer for all of us as we sort of navigate the day to day, as well as some of those points where we might be at our life. And so, as we bring this conversation to a close, I can just see that maybe the invitation of this conversation is what's ready to be let go. All right.
Yeah.
And it's alive.
Yeah. What in your life, when you just are really honest and look around, feels like it's taking and draining more energy than it's giving? What if anything was possible for you, if you were not beholden to anything, what would you let go of, if that was true? Because that will tell you exactly probably what you should be letting go of now, or can, I should say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kirk. I know we could keep going, but I want to just give you an opportunity. I think you've shared so many nuggets and so many really great opportunities for us to all reflect. And is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I think that, the bottom line, I know this is true for you and it's true for me, Barb, because you and I talk about it a lot, is if we dare to spend some time, instead of focusing on the outside and focusing on circumstances, if we dare to take some time and to even give ourselves, like, create this self-honoring choice of looking inside and giving us the space to examine kind of what inside of me, where do I feel that aliveness? Where do I feel that deeper sense of peace and wisdom? And what if I ran the experiment for the next period of time, the next month, next 6 months, next year, to choose from that, truth, from that space, and just to run the experiment to see, how does life go when you give yourself that space?
Great. I love it. Perfect place to end. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Kirk. I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you too, Barb. It's always a total joy to talk with you anytime.
As always, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you could take a moment to first subscribe and follow wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Hitting the follow button means you'll never miss a show. All you have to do is hit the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner or click on follow. While you're there, if you like what you're hearing, we'd appreciate you taking a moment to give us a shout out and review. Most importantly, however, If you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please pass it along. And finally, if you'd like to learn more about my work, Interverse Academy, or upcoming events, you can check out my website at barbarapatterson.com. You'll find some great resources, classes, and videos, and a lot more. Thank you again for being here. See you next time.